Today's daf we're going to be learning is Ketubot daf Kufet. This is the daf for Hoshana Rabbah. Today's daf is sponsored by Gita Neufeld in loving memory of her mother-in-law, Alice Neufeld, Adel Bat Natan Vesara. She was the Naomi to my, I hope, Ruth. We were blessed to have Oma live with us when she could no longer live alone at a feisty 90. Continue to be blessed as we watch our children and grandchildren follow in her ways of Torah, Yirat Shamayim, and Atznei Alechet. Yehi Zacha Baruch. Today's stuff is sponsored by Bimla Slutsky in loving memory of her sister, Rivka Sararina, Bat, Tina, and Yitzchak. We're going to get started from the bottom of our daf. Just a quick review. Okay, we had a Mishna about someone who makes her husband commit to her that he will support her daughter from previous marriage for the next 5 years. We talked about that commitment. Then the Gemara starts off with a seemingly unrelated machloket about someone who says, I owe you money. Question is, do we take him seriously and force him to pay or not? We saw Rabbi Yochanan says we do, and Reish Lakish says we don't. And then the Gemara tried to figure out what was the situation, and in the end concluded it must be that it was written down on a piece of paper, which already gave it seriousness, but it wasn't signed by witnesses, which therefore means it's kind of in between, which is why Rabbi Yochanan says you're obligated because that's enough. And Reish Lakish says, no, you're not, because there's no signatures. So now the Gemara wants to bring two different sources to try to prove Rabbi Yochanan. The first source is going to be from our Mishna. The bottom of Kupala Pamabet. Tana. Hanosei isha upaskayim olazunit bita 5 shanim. Chayav lezona 5 shanim. My love ke'agavna. It must be he committed to her and wrote it down on a piece of paper, which sounds just like our Mishna. The case that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are discussing. To which the Gemara says, Lo mishtari psikta ukidarav gid. Must be. It was a unique type of shtarot that were generally written. These documents were written between the family of the bride and the family of the groom before the wedding. It's like what we call nowadays tannaim. I'm going to see right now. Okay, they ask how much are you giving for your son? And then they ask the parents of the bride, right, the father, what are you giving to your daughter? And he said this and this. So the father's side said, I'm putting in this. And the groom's side said, I'm putting in this. The bride's side said, I'm putting in this. Do v'kidshu. Then they got up and got betrothed. Kanu. That is a kinyan. Whatever they committed to before the kiddushin is valid. Some people say the kiddushin has to be right away. If it's not right away, then no. Some people say not. That's why often we do tannaim at the wedding, even though the tannaim now are really just symbolic. Anyway, right, by the way, Yom Kidshu is the betrothal, which we do at the wedding. So these are things, haniknim ba'amira, according to Rav Gidel in the name of Rav, these are things that by just saying them, it's enough. And that's why we could say that maybe this was just stated as part of the Shtari Psikta. Okay, either they were written and not signed, or they were just spoken. But either which way, they have a unique law. And you can't learn from here to alone, because it's something unique specifically to wedding. Okay, we're going to get more in depth into this soon. We're going to have a gufo, which means we're going to go in depth into the statement of Rav Gidel in the name of Rav about the Shtari Psikta. So the first source didn't really prove to us Rabbi Yochanan because it wasn't the same type of thing. Tashma, let's learn from here. Katav lekohen, shani chayav lecha 5 slaim. Somebody writes to a kohen, I owe you 5 slaim. 5 slaim is the amount for pidyon haben. And let's say I have a firstborn son and I committed to this kohen, I owe you 5 slaim. So it sounds like I owe you for the pidyon haben. Chayav litain lo 5 slaim. Okay, I have a commitment. This is a document of commitment. And it sounds like we didn't have signatures. I just said I was committing to you. So it sounds very similar. Ubino eino padoy. But by the way, this 5 slaim that I wrote down in the document that I committed to you is not going to cover my pidyon haben. I'm going to have to give you another 5 slaim for that, because this 5 slaim I promised you, even though maybe it was for the pidyon haben, we're going to have to see why in a bit, isn't going to work to cover my pidyon haben. We don't really know why. We're going to explain. But right now, it seems like I wrote down, didn't sound like witnesses signed, and yet I'm obligated. It becomes like a loan. So to which the Gemara says, no, shani hatam de mishua bale midoraita. The reason I have to give you these 5 slaim is because I have a Torah commitment to give it to you. That's a little strange, because didn't we just say it's not really covering your pidyon haben? To which the Gemara says, first of all, if we're talking about your obligation of pidyon haben, why did you need to write it down then? If you have a Torah obligation to pay 5 slaim for pidyon haben, certainly don't need to write it down in a document. To which the answer, no, the reason I wrote it down was kedei lebarer lo kohen. I wanted to choose a particular Kohen, and I wanted to be committed to that Kohen. And therefore, I signed a document. So now we understand why I signed a document. We still are left to understand is, so if I sign this document, and it's for the Torah commitment of the Pidyon Ben, which we understood I signed because I wanted specifically this Kohen. So then it should work for Pidyon Ben. And why do we say the son is not redeemed by this money? And I actually have to pay double. So they say Ketubot. Ula explains this. Why? According to Ula, on a Torah level, as soon as I give the money, really my son is redeemed. The 5 sla'im that I committed in the document. However, we don't want people to think that this covered my Pidyon Ben. Why? Because people that might think that I could pay for Pidyon Ben with an IOU. I could say, listen, I owe you 5 sla'im. Let's do the Pidyon Ben and be done with it, and I'll pay you the 5 sla'im later. That doesn't work. So because I wrote down the shtar, I'm committing to you the 5 sla'im, the rabbis came and said, you can't pay that money in place of your Pidyon Ben. Like that can't cover your Pidyon Ben, because people will think then that you could pay the Pidyon Ben with an IOU, and you can't. So therefore, it's all separate reason. Anyway, this whole thing from the beginning doesn't prove anything, because what we answered in the beginning was this is a Torah obligation, and that's why it's valid even if I didn't sign it. And it doesn't teach you anything about a loan. So we had 2 attempts to try to prove Rabbi Yochanan. We didn't succeed. Now Rava is going to try to say it's actually machloket tannaim, as it says in the following source: arev hayotze achar chitum shtarot goveh minachasim b'nei chorin. If I'm a guarantor who comes after there was already a loan, after the document was signed, and then I sign my name underneath and I say, I'm guaranteeing this loan, but nobody signs after me. So I came after the document was already signed. They can collect from me. I became the guarantor. The person who took out, who's the lender, the creditor, he can come to me and demand the money from my free property. And in fact, it happened before Rabbi Yishmael. There was a case, and he said, yes, you could take from the guarantor from liened property. That sounds like Rabbi Yochanan, who said you have to pay because you wrote down in a document that's already, even though there's no signatures of anybody else, you wrote it. It's as if it's good. Amar lo ben nanas, eino goveh lo minachasim b'nei velo minachasim b'shobadi. You can't collect from free money. You can't collect from lien property. You can't collect it at all from the guarantor because there's no witnesses signed. That sounds like Rish Lakish. The source there continues. Amar lo lama. So Rabbi Yishmael says to him, why not? Yeah, well, it's true I wasn't there at the time of the loan, but I basically committed myself to being a guarantor. Why can't you collect from me? Amar lo. So he says back to Benanas, let's imagine the following scenario. Someone's got you at gunpoint in the shuk. Okay, here it says someone's strangling you. I walk by, I see someone strangling you in the shuk. I find you, and I say, wait, don't strangle this person. I'll give you the money. Patur, I don't actually have to give you the money. Why? Because I wasn't there in the beginning. He didn't loan you the money with me being the guarantor. The guarantor guarantees the loan from the beginning. If I come in later, it doesn't count. That's Rish Lakish. So the fact that I wrote down doesn't mean anything. So Lema, Rabbi Yochanan, Amar Rabbi Yishmael, Rish Lakish, Amar Ben Nanas. Sounds like their machloket breaks down exactly in the lines that we said before. To which the Gemara says no. Ben Nanas says the fact that the guarantor signed is irrelevant, right? It doesn't commit him in any way, shape, or form. That nobody could disagree with. In other words, Rish Lakish will say that fits perfectly well with me. Rabbi Yochanan could say, I have nothing to say. I obviously disagree with him. But starting now on Amud Bet, he pligi aliva de Rabbi Yishmael. Machloket is according to Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yochanan ki Rabbi Yishmael. So Rabbi Yochanan, in other words, meaning you can't say the lines break down. Rabbi Yochanan, Rish Lakish fits in with Rabbi Yishmael and Ben Nanas. No, even Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Rish Lakish can both theoretically explain their argument according to Rabbi Yishmael. Meaning, in Rabbi Yishmael's case, they would agree with him, but in our case, they wouldn't. Okay, how so? So Rabbi Yochanan to Rabbi Yishmael. Rabbi Yochanan obviously agrees with Rabbi Yishmael across the board. So he says, you wrote it, it's taken seriously, both in the guarantor and in the regular case of the loan where I said, I owe you money. and I wrote it down on a piece of paper. But Reish Lakish can say, Ad kan lo kama Rabbi Yishmael hatam, ela d'shayach le'shi'abud d'oraita. Reish Lakish can say, Rabbi Yishmael only said this in a case where there's a shibud on a Torah level. In other words, okay, now you have to understand something, which is a guarantor guarantees a loan. By Torah law, it's guaranteed by that person. This is because of Yehuda, who says, Anochi arevenu miyadikta b'tshenu. Okay, in the story of Yehuda and Binyamin, he says, I'm going to be an arev for Binyamin, okay, and you'll come take it from me. So because of that, we see that arevut, by just speaking alone, has a shibud, midoraita. So that's why in the arev case, Rabbi Yishmael says you're responsible. You can collect the loan from the guarantor. Aval hacha, but in a regular loan, lo shayach shi'abud d'oraita. But in a regular loan, there is no shibud on a Torah level. Gufa. Now, so that was what we did so far. Very simple. We took this machlok at Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish. We tried to bring two sources, tannaim sources, to prove Rabbi Yochanan was right. We rejected both proofs. Then Rava tried to say maybe it's machlok at tannaim. Even that was rejected. Now we're going to go into what Rav Gidl said in the name of Rav. Gufa amar Rav Gidl amar Rav. Kama tanuvten lebincha, kach v'kach. How much you're giving for your son? This and this. Kama tanuvten lebitcha. How much you're giving for your daughter? Kach v'kach. Amdu v'kidshu. They got up. They got betrothed. Kanu. Whatever they committed, they committed. And these are things that by just speaking alone, it's acquired. Okay? Now, Amarav. This, by the way, okay, we'll get to it in a minute. I'll keep going and then I'll go back. Amarav. It sounds like, Rava says, what Rav is saying seems to be only if she's still a young woman. Why? If she's young, what happens? If you remember, the money of Kiddushin, the betrothal money, goes to the father. So since he's benefiting from the Kiddushin money, he's willing to put money down on the table and commit things for her. But if she's already past the age of 12 and 6 months, then she's already grown up and she gets the Kiddushin money, in which case he's not benefiting at all. So therefore, if he's not benefiting at all, then you have to acquire this with some sort of benefit. You get something, they get something. But then Rava says, but Elohim amar Rav, but I swear that Rav really said afilu Bulgarian. In other words, you might have thought it was only an arev, but it's not true. Because if you don't say that, father of the groom doesn't get anything in return because the Kiddushin doesn't go to him. Ella, what benefit is making this work, this agreement? The pleasure that they get in knowing that they're betrothing their son or their daughter to the other side, that's enough hana'ah for them to say, I'm committing this, I'm putting down this and this money. And it's the benefit that they're getting. There's an interesting machloka between the commentaries about whether this is an actual kinyan because they benefited, that basically creates the acquiring, the act of acquiring. Some people say, no, it's not a kinyan, actually. You don't need a kinyan, because what does a kinyan do? We pick up a handkerchief. It shows we're serious. In this case, you don't need, it's obvious you're serious because you're benefiting, right, from the fact that you're marrying off your child. That already makes it that you're serious about it and you're committing. So you don't even need a kinyan. So there's a debate about whether this is in place, works like a kinyan, or it doesn't even work like a kinyan. You don't even need a kinyan. Okay. Now, we have another question. Ravina Rav Ashi. These things that we're talking about, these commitments. Okay, both the Mishna where the wife has the husband commit that he's going to support the child for 5 years, the daughter, and all these commitments that each side makes to each other. Nitnu likateb or lo nitnu likateb? Debate about how to read this question. Are you allowed to write them or are you not allowed to write them? Rashi understands that you're allowed to. Maybe you're not allowed to because once it's written, people will think that you collected from nechasim shuabadim, lien property, and you can't. So maybe you can't write it down so that people don't mistakenly think that you collected from lien property. So a bunch of other ways to understand this. Some people say, maybe, are you allowed to write down? Some people maybe think it means do you have to write it down or do you not have to write it down? Then they understand it a little bit differently, but we'll stick with Rashi right now. Rav Ashi answered, lo nitnu l'katev. You can't write them down. Again, depending on how you see it, or you don't need to write them down. So today. Now we're going to have 3 questions on Rav Ashi. The first one from our Mishna. Hapikrim hayu kotvin al menat she'azunu bitech 5 shanim kozman shatimi. What does it sound like? They would write it down. It says kotvim. Kotvim means writing down. Here you see these commitments were written down. My kotvim. So the Gemara says, no, that doesn't prove anything against Rav Ashi, who said you don't write them down, because you can explain kotvim means omrim. They said, to which the Gemara says, the kari leil amira ksiva. Well, if they said they meant to say, they should say they said. Why did it say they wrote? It means they wrote. Right? We don't call writing. We don't call speaking writing. But what we do, in fact, maybe you'll remember, we just had this not very long ago, and we do, in fact, that's not, it says in the Mishna, if he writes to his wife, I don't have anything to do with your property. Rabbi Chia said what it really means is he says to his wife. He doesn't actually have to write it, even saying. So there you see, the writing could mean saying, and therefore this doesn't prove anything. Source number 2, Mishna in Bava Batra, Tashma. You can't write documents of betrothal or marriage. Marriage means ketubah. Betrothal, we're going to have to figure out what it means, unless you have the agreement of both of them. It sounds like if you do have the agreement of both, then you write them down. What does it sound like? You write down shtarei rusin. What are shtarei rusin if not shtarei psikta, these things that we're talking about? My love, shtarei psikta, is it not? And then it seems you would write them down as long as both sides agree to it. To which the Gemara says, lo, shtarei erusin mamash. And what it's talking about, remember, you can betroth a woman in 3 ways, and one of them is with a document. It means if you were betrothing her with a document, that document would have to have been written with her and his agreement, their knowledge. To which they say, Kid Rav Papa, Rav Shrevya. And we're going to see support for this in what Rav Papa and Rav Shrevya said. It's actually a machloket. To Itmar, Katvu Lishma. They wrote the Shtar Kiddushin for him and for her specifically. But Shelomi Data, but she didn't know they were writing it. Now, even if in the end she agrees when the betrothal happens, she didn't know when it was being written. Rabba Ravina Amre Mekudesha. They say she's betrothed. Rav Papa Rav Shrevya Amar Ena Mekudesha. They say she's not betrothed. She had to have known about it from the beginning. In which case, Enkotrin Shtarei Rusin V'Nisuin Elamidat Shnehan is according to the way Rav Papa and Rav Shrevya explain it, which is if she doesn't know about it when they wrote it, it's not valid. But then it has nothing to do with Shari Psikta, these tannaim, these conditions about the marriage, which is what we're discussing. And then you have no, right? This is what's being written is the Shtar Erusin, the Shtar Kiddushin, not the Shtar of the Psikta, which is what we're looking for. Tashma, third source, our Mishna again. Meitu, Tashma, Meitu, if both of the husbands die, you committed to give this woman mizono. Right? She ends up being in a stronger position than his daughters. You see, his daughters means like his daughters with the wife who he's marrying now, and they have children going forward. When they go to get mizono, they can't collect from lien property because we've learned already mizono can't be collected from lien property. But this woman, this daughter who got the commitment, can collect from lien property. Now, if she can collect from lien property, what do you see? It must be it was written, because you certainly can't collect from lien property if it was never written. So there you see it could be written. So, no, it must be that that's talking about a case where they did an actual kinyan. And the wife made the husband commit with an actual act of acquiring, and that's why you can get from nechasim mishuavadim. But otherwise, you wouldn't be able to. To which they say, wait, if he did a kinyan with her about the mizono of the daughter, this daughter for the 5 years, she must have done a kinyan with him about her own daughters as well that will be born to them in the future. To which the Gemara says, no, he did a kinyan with the first daughter regarding the first daughter, but not with the future daughters. Oh, my psaka. Why would you distinguish? And why would they only do a kinyan? Why would she make him do a kinyan about this daughter, but not about future daughters? Because she did a kinyan at the time on the whole thing. But those girls weren't around at the time. So the kinyan is not relevant to them because they weren't around at the time. Whereas the ones who were around at the time, it was relevant for, that was the one who he was committing to for the first 5 years. So then they say, Milo askinan dehave b'shak kinyan. What do you mean? Couldn't you also say the Mishnah could apply to daughters that were around at the time of the kinyan? Like, for example, hechidami kigon de garsha v'hadra. Let's say he Right? She had a daughter from a previous marriage. Then she married this guy. Then they got divorced, and then they got remarried. What about the kids from their first marriage, right? From second marriage of this woman, first marriage with this man. They were around at the time. So theoretically, she could have children that were around, and then it should apply to them. And then you can't make this distinction. Her daughters, right? The daughter who's not his versus the other daughters. So what do they say? No. Even in that case, the kinyan works for the one who wasn't in a tanai beitin, meaning the commitment of every husband to his wife is that the daughters that they have will get sustained, okay? But it doesn't include any daughters she brings in from beforehand, from a different marriage. So therefore, the kinyan worked for what was less expected, the tanai beit, when there was no tanai beitin. So therefore, again, let's read it inside. Ihi delayed to tanai beitin mahani la kinyan. The one, the daughter from before, from a different marriage, she wasn't part of this tanai beitin, which is even if you didn't write a ketubah, you have to give it anyway. And therefore, the kinyan was for that. But but the girls, their daughters that either that were existing or right that came later, but the daughters between these two people, since it's a tanai beitin and he has to support them, therefore the kinyan doesn't apply for them. To which the Gemara says, I don't get it. Migra gare, so they're going to be worse because they have a tanai beitin? To which they say yes. In other words, they are worse. Worse in the sense that they can't collect from lien property. Why is that? There's always a concern that if the commitment is so strong that it's a tanai beitin, that he's going to have to do it no matter what, even if he didn't write it, any commitment, then sometimes he gives them money already in his lifetime and puts it aside for them and says, listen, in the event that I die, take your mizonot from here. That's why they can't collect from lien property. Okay. And that's why they're in a weaker position, dafka, because they have a stronger position in general, but it weakens them in terms of the lien property. Okay, last part for today. Lo yomah harishon. Okay, one of the lines in the Mishna said the first husband can't say, listen, when she comes to live by me, I'll support her, the daughter. But right, he has to molich mizonotah lemakom she'ima. He has to go bring the mizonot to where she's living with her mother. So now we learn a very interesting halacha about childcare. Where does the child end up? Does she end up with the family, right? This is a little bit about custody between divorced couples and also even widowed. Does the family of the husband take over, or does the wife get to be in charge? From here you learn the daughters go with the mother, even if they're older. To which the Gemara says, maybe she was a minor, maybe she was young, and that's why she was a young girl. Maybe that's why she was with her mother. She gets older, not necessarily, just like this case that happened. Tanya, as we see in a bright time, Mishamed, Binech ben katan li'imo. Someone dies, and there's a young child left for the mother, meaning the mother's still alive. They start having a fight over where's the kid going to live. We leave him with the mother, and not with anyone who's supposed to inherit from him. In other words, who's part of the Yerusha. Why? Because we'll get to that line in a minute. But there was a case where this happened, and that's why they said never again. Since they could inherit from him, they basically killed the child because they wanted to get his money and therefore slaughtered him. Okay? So interesting language, chatu, they slaughtered him. Okay, but they slaughtered him on ayin reish chupchake. What does that stand for? So depending on what Gemara you're looking at, you might find different answers. There's many different manuscripts with different things, and we're going to see why in a minute. Some people say it's arev harishon. The first night he got there, they slaughtered him. Some people say it's arev hapesach, and they didn't even care that they were going to become impure. They were so desperate to get his money that they slaughtered him right away. Some people say it's erev Rosh Hashanah. Okay, it's the first night of Rosh Hashanah that it happened. Why is this so interesting? Because erev Pesach seems to be the accurate version, and they changed it and maybe turned it into abbreviation because of the censor. Why? Because this gave a source for blood libels, because they're slaughtering children on erev Pesach. Because of the blood libels, they cut this out of the text and kind of shortened it to, or changed it to erev harishon, or something else that could work in. And you could say, oh yeah, it was ayin reish, and they thought it was erev Pesach, but it wasn't. Fascinating issue here in terms of the censor, which happens in a whole bunch of different cases. In any case, this seems to show that young children should stay with their mother, because if people can inherit their stuff, the brothers, then there's a concern they might kill them. To which they say, no, that doesn't prove anything, because in Ken, then it just should have said, give it to the girl wherever she is, right? Whether she's with her mother, whether she's on, with her father's family, it doesn't matter. I'm just starting the top of the next page. Why does it say lemakom where her mother is? Shmat mina bat etzelaim lo shna gdola v'lo shna ktana. From here you can learn the mother, that the daughter always goes with the mother, whether she's young, whether she's older, it doesn't matter. And in fact, this is quoted in the halacha when it comes to custody issues. When it's a daughter, she often the default is to go with the mother, unless there's some reason why the mother is not adept at bringing her up, and there's reasons. Then you can take it away from the mother, but otherwise the default option for the girls is more to be with their mother. Very interesting topic. Again, not for Daf Yomi Shiur, but you can look into it more further. With that, wishing everybody a modim l'simcha, chag sameach, and we will meet back up. All the dapim, I'm posting them all already on Friday so that you can get ahead. So they'll all be up through the first day of Shmini Atzeret, Monday. And then on Tuesday, I'll teach as usual. Those in Chutz La'aretz, we're still keeping Chag, so you'll listen after Chag. Okay, have a great day, everyone.